All right. Well, like we said, thank you for having me here. My involvement with the NBA Combine has started from way back. I started with the Seattle Supersonics as an intern and assistant from 1996 to 2003. And during that time, the head strength and conditioning coach, Dwight Daub, we were in an interesting situation. Just how our combine came about. In the late 90s, what we used to do with basketball players, in the off season leading up to the draft, the 2 months leading up to the draft, the players would go around and visit multiple teams. Now, during this time, each team had their own battery of tests, whether it be bench press, leg press, conditioning tests. Every team had their own test. So what ended up happening is players would have to visit 5 teams in a week. So they'd be flying cross country back and forth, sometimes back-to-back days. And what one team was, on a Monday, Portland could have them squatting max effort or for reps. And the next day we have to do a leg press as well, or whatever the test we had. And we found that players were becoming very sore. They were becoming overtrained during this time, and some even injured. What happened was in 2000, we decided, in 1997, when I was just a humble assistant, we decided, hey, we need to find a way that we can get the tests that we need, have it done at once, and for all the teams to be at one place so these kids don't have to go around and do multiple testing. They can do individual basketball workouts, but just so they don't have to do all this testing back to back. So what happened was in 1997, December of 1997, 98, we talked about it. 1999, the NBA said, okay, in 2000, we'll have our first combine. So in the summer of 1999, we decided we had to come up with an abundance of tests. We had to come up with a battery of tests. So that's why we wanted a combine. Then we wanted to see what tests we wanted. And at the time, going back now 21 years, I do remember just drawing up on the board, we had to talk about what measurements did we want, because it was twofold. We wanted to know everything about the athlete that we could physiologically, not biologically necessarily, but physiologically. So we said, okay, let's make sure we got to get their height. We want their height with shoes and without. Reason being is because obviously they play with their shoes on, but the shoes and the inserts and everything could be such a big discrepancy. And what we found out, colleges and players were lying about their height for so many years. So we wanted to give teams true measures of how tall they were. Then we had the time, it was the wingspan. For some, the wingspan has just always been, since a longer arm, it really helps in this sport where it comes to defense, blocking shots, getting your shot up, and just being able to be big in the lane and just functioning in the sport of basketball. And then we got into what are the measurements. So we did a standing reach, a one-arm standing reach, which we used for twofold. Number one, to see actually how high their reach was, and also to be able to use a vertical jump test later. So then we obviously had body weight and body fat. And at the time, we just used a scale, no shoes, no shirt. And then we used 3-site Skindex caliper testing for their body fat. And this is obviously going back to 2000s. Those were all the measurements. And then we decided what battery of tests. So we went through what athletic characteristics do we want to measure. So then we definitely want to see speed. And we decided to go with a 3/4 court sprint because that's the most common distance. You don't have a lot of people running from baseline to baseline. 3/4 court sprint, which is also 75 feet, which is a 25-yard sprint. And there was at that time some research out there just on different gates up to there. So we did that, and then we wanted to do something agility. And at the time, we also wanted to make it basketball specific. So what we originally did is we did this lane agility drill where we're using the basketball lane. We do a sprint, defensive slide right, back pedal, slide left, all the way around the key, and then complete it going the other way. So you went sprint, slide, back pedal, slide, then the other way, slide, sprint, slide, and finish in the back pedal. And then we also had the 2 jumps. We had a no-step max jump, and then we had a 5-yard approach maximal vertical jump. That was our actually only lower body power test, if you will, as a way of kind of seeing power in terms of a vertical jump. And then we did a max vert, which gives us what's kind of called the wow factor. A vertical jump with the approach, you can see how they can change, horizontal speed to vertical displacement. And it's a very functional movement in the sport of basketball, whether you're running down a block shot, running down to get a rebound, and it gives us an idea of how well they're able to jump with a max vert. And then at the time, we also wanted to do an upper body test, so we did a bench press for max reps, and that was 185 pounds, which was 80 kilos, basically 80 kilos for a max amount of repetitions. So that was the original battery of tests. And at the time, going back, these tests were very, they were approved by the NBA Strength Coaches Association, which at the time was new. And we were, everybody, it was voted on and it passed through by the strength coaches, and the general managers liked it. We explained to them why we're doing what we were doing. They liked the idea of the test, that we had all the components. They liked the lane agility test because it was also around the lane. We could see how well they moved. So that was the original. We came up with that leading to 2000. And then from 2000 to 2009, my role was I was assisting during the testing. I was assisting the head strength, Dwight Daub, who was the director of the testing. I was his assistant. So I was doing everything from making sure everything, assisting him with anything you can imagine, from making sure that at the time, we didn't have electronic gates either. Everything was handheld. So when we talk about the tests, the lane agility and the sprint were done with, we had 4 stopwatchers, timers. We would go on we would take the high and the low we took out, and we took the average of the 2 middle. So this is before we had electronic timing. Electronic timing joined us in 2009, I believe, but anyway, or 7 or 8, right around there. But anyway, we can get to that later. But 2009, my role was to assist on every part of it. And then what happened was at the combine, not to bore you guys too much, but the combine is usually done in May, which is during the playoffs, like second round and into the conference finals. So what happened was my mentor, his team he went to the Oklahoma City Thunder, and they were going to the finals. So what ended up happening is, or going late in the playoffs, so he couldn't be there to do it, so I ended up running it. So literally from 2009 on and to this very day, I became pretty much the director and co-director with Dwight Daub. As I told you, in the way it was ran, not just what the tests were, but it was important. We also had what order we did the tests, and we had to think about the energy systems when it came to it. It made no sense to do the bench press first. We wanted to make sure we kept an order of the order of the test. We did our standing vert, we do our max vert, lane agility, we do 3/4 court sprint, and then we finish with the bench press, what it was. And the reason being is we did our explosive when they're more fresh tests first, and we kind of leading them up into their max speed, which came into the 3. We were worried about guys pulling up on a hamstring, pulling something when they had to do a max sprint test of 25 yards. So we led up to that with the vertical, max vert, lane agility, and then the sprint. And then we said, okay, what do we know of these tests? So the way that we were getting the results is at first when we didn't have any data into, there hadn't been a combine before. Now the way we were using the tests at the time, at the very beginning, it was comparing them against each other. So the results were like, at the end of the day, we knew what, just from our time as strength coaches and performance coaches, we knew what good numbers were for guys that can jump. We knew good jumpers. We knew a 40-inch vert was a very high vert. We knew if you can do the bench press 15 times, that was very good. And we knew if you could do it 1, you probably weren't very upper body strong. But at the time, really what it was is, as we were developing a database, it was more used for comparing athlete A to athlete B and just seeing what were the highs and lows we were working with. And that's the first couple of years. As we just go down the line, but when we did the vertical jump, it was easy to compare. Max vert, this is where you'd see all kinds of numbers from in the 40s to in the 20s. So you can really see a really big disparity there amongst the athletes. And then we got to lane agility, and this is an interesting one because the numbers were, guys, that test takes anywhere between 10 to 13 seconds, depends how it is. So at the end of the day, it was comparing. The test started with looking at the numbers, but that test became more of watching to see how well guys move, because the test cannot be done without crossing their feet. We want them to stay in defensive stance. We want them to go as fast as they can from a slide to a back pedal. The numbers were good and it would show who was slow, but at the same time, it wasn't a true agility test. It was such a long test where agility, you're testing, true agility with max efforts. You're probably, in the anywhere from like 5 to 7 seconds. But at the same time, guys were becoming really good at being fast at it because they would make up in their sprint, or they would make up in their back pedal, or just slide with the wheel, or at the time, slide and cross their feet, which was something that we just couldn't allow to happen. So, but then of course then we went to the 3/4 course sprint, and those numbers were, with that being a test of no more than in the 3 seconds, how much different was it? 3.10 to a 3.27. Well, what it was is just comparing who was faster than who. And then as years went down the line and we started to have, you get anywhere between, around 70 people a year. So 70 times 20, now you're 1,400 numbers, right? With multiple reps. So now you can really kind of did some, some cross studies were done on, after a while, you kind of knew what was the fast test, what wasn't. It wasn't carrying player A to player B. It was this. We had enough data to say these are good numbers. These are okay numbers. These are great numbers for all the various tests. Does that make sense, Steve?
Yep.
But I'll tell you, lessons are learned during this too. And I'll tell you one thing that was interesting. That I'll tell you one interesting. You see at the bottom, I have here lessons learned. One year we went to Orlando, and in Orlando, because of the setup of the gym, we weren't able to do the anthropometric measurements in a different area. What we used to do is we would do the anthros before the basketball. So at the combine is not just what we're doing. They also play basketball. So what the order was for the first many years was we did all our anthros, we did our testing, and then they went to play basketball. This year in Orlando, because of the setup and the time, the NBA wanted to move it to where they did all their basketball first. And then when they were done with their basketball, they were warm. And then we came into their testing where they would do all their testing in anthros as like one long battery of tests after they were done. Well, so here's what happened, Steve. After that, they ended up, then after the combine is when they spend about a month and a half visiting teams. Well, teams pretty much always redo a lot of the tests. So we kind of fought against what, some teams had their own individual battery tests that they would do. There's a couple of teams that just didn't like what all the combine tests were and had their own tests that they wanted to see, whether it be another strength test, another agility test, whatever it was. And some teams just used the Chicago numbers. Now, when it came to anthros, some teams still redid the anthros. Well, this year we found after that everyone's heights were so much taller than they were in Chicago. So we had to figure out what was going on. Well, what ended up happening was the guys were getting tested with the teams first thing in the morning before exercise. They didn't. So what happened was from sleeping, you're tallest in the morning. We had to do a lot of research. Obviously we came late. That guys were taller after sleeping. It was compounded throughout the day. They were not shortened. Whereas after basketball and pounding, they became shorter throughout the day. That was a lesson learned that we decided from now on. So now the way we do the combine is 6 a.m. before they eat, before they do their blood work and their urine work for the medical. We do all their anthropometric measurements, their blood and their urine work, and then in the afternoon is when they do their basketball and their testing. Anyway, so that was one lesson learned. Naming of tests, I have here, the lane agility is what it used to be called. It's no longer called the lane agility because we feel it's not a true agility test. It's more of a movement assessment test. So we changed it now to pro lane drill. And then if we have changing a test, back then those are the tests we have. And then because we wanted to have a true agility test, we went into what's called the NBA short shuttle, which is like a 5-10-5 where they're using the NBA lane as fast as they can. We don't care what their movement is, but they got to get to outside of one lane, back outside to the other lane of the free throw lane, outside lane, out. You start in the middle, get to the outside of one, get to the outside of the other, and finish in the middle. It's more of a 2.5, 2.5 test, if you will, of yards. With that test, Now we had a true agility test, but now the test itself only takes like 3 seconds, and it's also, they have to react to a light. So we now wanted to get a little more functional and a little more basketball specific. So we added a reaction component to the test. So they had to react to a light, and that light determines what side they go to first. So we changed that to our short shuttle, which is our true agility test. As we continue to move forward, do we want to keep the bench press? We have some people who felt like maybe we just didn't need the bench press. I don't know if you guys all, I'm sure you've heard of Kevin Durant. Well, Kevin Durant was the first pick of the NBA draft, turned out to be a very good basketball player. He got 0 bench press reps and turned out to have a very successful career. So a lot of people, said, you know what? Screw the bench press test. We don't need the bench press test. It's not telling us how good they are about it. So now some of the general managers don't feel it's that important, yet some strength coaches who are still going to get their hands on these players would like to know how strong they are. Now, you can either do it during the combine or just wait till they come to your individual team, or if you end up drafting the athlete. We added screens and tests, force plates. We now have them do a series of jumps at the end of their bench press test, where they have sensors looking around, so we can 4D sensors, so we can see their movement when they're jumped, kind of break down more movement analysis sensors as well as force plates, so we can see force distribution, asymmetries, and whatnot. It was there's lessons you learn and you kind of progress. This last one here is kind of funny. This height cheating, if you see this is a funny story we had. When we do the heights with and without shoes, we had an athlete come through, and when we go down and position their feet, we felt something in his sock. So on his height without shoes, he actually had about 1/2 inch orthotics in his socks, trying to be taller. So because of that, we had to change the rule that we have to check their feet and no more socks wearing during your height without shoes test. I thought that was pretty funny.